His mouth was pried open, and molten gold was poured down his throat. It happened shortly after the Roman defeat at Carrhae in 53 BCE. Crassus, surrounded, captured, and already dead or dying, depending on the account, was used for spectacle. Parthian soldiers mocked the Roman obsession with wealth. To them, Crassus was the richest man in Rome, consumed by greed. In death, they gave him the only currency they believed he truly valued. His body was mutilated. His head and right hand were severed and later sent to King Herodes II. At a royal banquet, Crassus's severed head was used as a prop in a performance of Euripides' Bacchia brutal parody of Roman ambition. The man who once stood alongside Julius Caesar and Pompey in the first triumvirate died in disgrace, far from Rome, in foreign sand. His army shattered, his plans failed, and his legacy scorched by both legend and fact. He didn't begin as a tyrant, just a voice and a crowd that listened. Marcus Licinius Crassus was born in 115 BCE into an old and respected Roman family of senatorial rank. His father, Publius Licinius Crassus, was a distinguished consul and censor who upheld the conservative values of the Roman Republic. Crassus grew up in a world defined by social hierarchy, family honor, and political ambition. He had 2 brothers, and, like many aristocratic Roman boys, Crassus received a traditional education in rhetoric, philosophy, and military discipline. His early years were shaped by the expectations of public service and loyalty to Rome's institutions. The Republic at that time was fracturing under economic inequality, slave revolts, and political violence. In 87 BCE, Crassus's father and one of his brothers were killed during the Marian Purges, a wave of killings ordered by the populist leader Gaius Marius. Crassus, still in his 20s, fled to Hispania. There, he hid in caves and rebuilt his resources by raising a private army and cultivating local influence. When the political tides shifted, Crassus returned to Rome and aligned himself with Lucius Cornelius Sulla, who reclaimed power through force. After Sulla's victory, Crassus began acquiring wealth. He bought confiscated property from the defeated Marians at low prices and profited heavily from real estate. He also established a private fire brigade that would respond to fires only if the property owners sold their buildings at a discount. Through these methods, he became the wealthiest man in Rome. In public, he was measured and calculating. In private, he was relentless in pursuit of wealth and influence. Crassus began financing political allies, securing loyalty through favors and loans. His reputation grew, not for military brilliance or charisma, but for his access to resources and his skill in navigating the power structures of the Republic. But this early promise would later give way to violence and control. Crassus's early worldview was formed in the shadow of civil war and institutional collapse. His loyalty to Sulla was not just political, it was personal. Sulla had restored the conservative elite to power, offering Crassus both revenge for his father's death and a path back into the Roman aristocracy. Crassus became a sullen loyalist, participating in the proscriptions, a state-sanctioned purge of enemies. Property was confiscated, names were listed for execution, and survivors were exiled. Crassus enriched himself through this system. This period taught him that control of property and military force could ensure survival and create opportunity. It was a lesson he would not forget. He admired Roman traditions, but not in the abstract. His understanding of the Republic was transactional. Power resided in money, leverage, and the ability to reward loyalty. Unlike Caesar, who drew power from popular support, or Pompey, who rose through military glory, Crassus built his base quietly, through loans, patronage, and calculated silence. Crassus also absorbed the Roman belief in dignitas, personal reputation bound to public achievement. But for him, dignitas was inseparable from divitia wealth. He trained as an orator and studied law, but it was in real estate, contracting, and finance that he mastered the structures of control. He maintained a wide network of debtors among the senatorial class, ensuring that many of his political peers owed him personally. His military experience was modest until 72 before the Common Era, when a slave revolt challenged the state. Led by Spartacus, the uprising threatened Rome itself. Crassus volunteered to suppress it. He funded his own army, imposed brutal discipline, including decimation, and eventually crushed the revolt in 71 before the Common Era. Over 6,000 captured slaves were crucified along the Appian Way. This victory gave him military credibility and strengthened his claim to power, though resentment followed. His tactics were effective, but not admired. Pompey, returning from Hispania, claimed credit for ending the revolt, a slight Crassus never forgot. Crassus now believed that force, money, and calculated alliances could secure any prize in Rome. These convictions would shape every decision that followed. Soon, those ideas would be put to the test, not in theory, but in power. In 70 BCE, Crassus achieved the highest office in the Roman Republic, consul. He shared the role with Pompey, his political rival and uneasy ally. Their joint consulship marked a significant shift. Both men had supported Sulla's regime, but now sought to roll back some of its harshest laws. The arrangement was practical, not cordial. Crassus provided money and influence. Pompey brought military prestige. During his term, Crassus pushed through legislation that restored the powers of the tribunes, a move popular with the public, but aimed at gaining favor rather than reforming the system. He also oversaw public works and continued to expand his real estate empire. By this point, he controlled a massive network of properties, businesses, and debt relationships across Rome. Crassus understood that power was fragile unless embedded in institutions. He cultivated judicial connections, funded building projects, and acted as a political sponsor for dozens of rising figures. His name opened doors, his loans created dependence, and his silence brought immunity from enemies he preferred not to confront publicly. But public admiration remained elusive. He lacked the charisma of Pompey and the battlefield glory of Caesar. He compensated with accessibility, hosting banquets, offering legal aid, and investing in public games. Still, his image was that of a broker, not a hero. In 60 BCE, he entered into a private arrangement with Caesar and Pompey, later known as the First Triumvirate. It was not a formal office, but a strategic alliance. Crassus financed Caesar's campaign for consul and supported land reforms that favored Pompey's veterans. In return, he secured influence over tax farming contracts in the East, enriching his allies and increasing his own stake in foreign affairs. This alliance temporarily stabilized Roman politics. Crassus now held influence in every direction: the Senate, the courts, the provinces, and the streets. He had reached a peak few in Rome ever touched. Now in power, Crassus began turning belief into law and law into control. By 56 BCE, the First Triumvirate was strained. Pompey, Caesar, and Crassus each pursued separate ambitions, and the Republic was fracturing under pressure. A meeting in Lucca, arranged by Caesar, reaffirmed their alliance. Crassus and Pompey agreed to run for consul again in 55 BCE, with Caesar's support, to extend Caesar's command in Gaul and secure influence for themselves. Once elected, Crassus pursued a key interest: Syria. He arranged to govern the province after his consulship. The motive was clear: wealth and military glory. The East was rich in resources and unclaimed prestige. Parthia, Rome's eastern rival, offered a tempting target. Crassus intended to succeed where Pompey had stopped and to equal Caesar's growing fame in Gaul. He prepared for war. But the Senate was divided, and many saw the campaign as unnecessary. Parthia had not provoked Rome. Crassus pushed forward regardless, using his consular authority to mobilize troops and resources. His son, Publius Crassus, already a respected officer under Caesar, joined him. In 53 BCE, Crassus crossed the Euphrates with around 40,000 men. He ignored local advice and avoided Roman allies who offered safer routes. He rejected offers of reinforcements from Armenian King Artavasdes II. Instead, he marched directly into Parthian territory, open desert, expecting a quick and decisive engagement. At Carrhae, the Parthians struck. Their cavalry, especially horse archers and heavily armored cataphracts, overwhelmed the Roman formations. The Romans were unused to such mobility and precision. Crassus's forces were slowly encircled and cut down. Publius led a charge that was isolated and destroyed. His severed head was presented to Crassus during negotiations. Crassus was trapped, his army depleted, morale collapsed, and escape routes blocked. In desperation, he agreed to meet Parthian general Charina under a flag of truce. What followed is unclear. Some sources claim a scuffle broke out. Others suggest betrayal. Crassus was killed during or shortly after the meeting. His death marked more than personal failure. It broke the balance of the triumvirate. With Crassus gone, tension between Caesar and Pompey escalated. Civil war was no longer a possibility, it was inevitable. Crassus was no longer just enforcing ideas. Now, those ideas were becoming systems of control, and they were failing. Crassus never ruled Rome as a dictator, but his influence penetrated every layer of its political machinery. His power came not from ideology or public devotion, but from systemic control. Networks of debt, legal pressure, patronage, and calculated force. He created no secret police. He passed no singular law of repression. Instead, Crassus operated through systems that made others act on his behalf. His wealth allowed him to finance candidates, direct judicial outcomes, and obstruct legislation. Many senators owed him money, some literally, others politically. He could delay trials, shift alliances, or withhold funds from key projects. In return, he demanded support or silence. His most visible acts of cruelty occurred during the Spartacus revolt in 72 to 71 BCE. After taking command of the Roman response, Crassus reinstated decimatione, rare and brutal punishment. When units showed cowardice, every 10th man was executed by lot, beaten to death by his comrades. It was a method designed not for justice, but for discipline through fear. It worked. Roman morale hardened, and desertion stopped. After defeating Spartacus, Crassus ordered the mass crucifixion of over 6,000 prisoners along the Appian Way, from Capua to Rome. The display served no military purpose. It was a message. Order had been restored, and the price of rebellion was public agony. This use of terror was not emotional or impulsive. It was structured. Crassus sought to re-establish Roman authority and his own reputation through visible consequences. The executions were methodical, not theatrical. No last speeches were recorded. No public mercy offered. Crassus also operated within the Roman legal system to control economic life. He acquired burned or seized properties, often through technical loopholes. His private fire brigade would arrive at fires, but only begin extinguishing once the property owner agreed to sell, typically far below value. This gave him control over key real estate sectors in Rome, often forcing neighbors or rivals into business dependency. His influence extended to taxation. Crassus had strong ties to the publicani, Roman tax contractors. He advocated for their interests in the Senate, helping them renegotiate unfair contracts or avoid penalties. In exchange, they supported his operations in the East and helped fund his campaigns. The institutions Crassus used were all legal, but under his hand, they became tools of pressure, fear, and silent coercion. His cruelty was not emotional, it was systemic. Even individuals close to Crassus were targeted by these systems, if they interfered with the flow of money or obedience. Crassus's world was built on fragile trust. His relationships, even with allies, were transactional, grounded in mutual benefit, not personal loyalty. As his influence expanded, the strain between Crassus and his peers deepened. He trusted few, and he was trusted by fewer still. His alliance with Pompey had always been tense. After Spartacus's defeat, Crassus believed he had earned uncontested military glory. But Pompey, arriving late from Spain, claimed he had mopped up the remnants and received a triumph in Rome. Crassus was denied the same honor. From that point forward, Crassus never forgave the public humiliation. Their joint consulship in 70 BCE masked open resentment. They never worked together again except out of necessity. Even within the first triumvirate, the cracks were visible. Crassus funded Caesar's rise, but Caesar grew bolder, more independent, and more popular. Crassus's role in the alliance was largely behind the scenes. He lacked the battlefield victories to command mass loyalty or inspire fear in the provinces. Increasingly, he relied on financial networks and influence over contractors, not charisma, not armies. He became wary of independent actors. Political associates who strayed too far from his patronage were quietly sidelined. Opponents were buried in litigation or forced into debt. Senators who resisted his tax reforms were removed from advisory roles. He didn't argue in public, he isolated them. His own son, Publius Crassus, was one of the few he openly praised. A competent commander and respected officer under Caesar, Publius was seen as Crassus's legacy. But even this bond was vulnerable. When Crassus prepared for the Parthian campaign, he insisted Publius accompany him, despite warnings from allies that the campaign was poorly planned. It wasn't a strategic necessity, it was personal reinforcement, a move rooted in pride, not prudence. During the disastrous battle at Carrhae, Publius led a flanking force that was isolated by Parthian cavalry. Surrounded and cut off, he was killed in combat. The Parthians severed his head and presented it to Crassus during surrender talks. The emotional weight of that moment is not recorded, but in practical terms, Crassus had lost his only trusted heir, his tactical partner, and the final anchor to family. His alliances had become brittle. His personal circle was hollowed out by suspicion, calculation, and loss. Signs of strain in leadership and personal stability were now evident. By the time Marcus Licinius Crassus crossed into Parthian territory in 53 BCE, signs of decline had already emerged. Though only in his early 60s, he was physically diminished. Accounts describe him as fatigued during long marches and increasingly irritable in council. He had no recent experience in Eastern warfare and lacked the stamina of his youth. Still, he insisted on direct command and refused key strategic advice. The campaign was marked by erratic decisions. Crassus rejected an offer of 20,000 Armenian cavalry from King Artavasdes, choosing instead to move through open desert, exposing his infantry-heavy force to Parthian cavalry. Roman scouts warned of ambushes, but Crassus dismissed them. He refused to halt or fortify, believing that swift movement would bring a quick victory. As conditions worsened, he grew impatient and secretive. Officers complained of poor communication. His judgment narrowed. He ignored dissenting voices, including those with local experience. Even Publius, his son, voiced concerns about enemy tactics. Crassus overruled him. The psychological strain intensified at Carrhae. The Parthian general Chaerenae employed deceptive maneuvers, feigned retreats, sudden attacks, and relentless harassment with mounted archers. Roman troops were surrounded, cut off from water, and subjected to sustained missile fire. Morale collapsed. Crassus, once composed and calculating, began making reactive choices. He ordered Publius to lead a cavalry charge without sufficient support. It failed catastrophically. When his son's head was delivered back by the enemy, witnesses noted that Crassus said little. He withdrew from view. Roman ranks were demoralized. The chain of command frayed. Some accounts describe him pacing in silence. Others say he broke down before senior officers. There are no direct writings or quotes, only fragmented reports from observers. What is clear, his control deteriorated. His physical strength, tactical focus, and emotional containment, hallmarks of his public career, began to erode under stress. During the night retreat from Carrhae, discipline collapsed. Soldiers abandoned equipment. Crassus reportedly refused to ride a horse, marching with his men despite exhaustion. Others pleaded with him to flee. But he refused to leave the wounded. His face, once stern and reserved, now showed fear and hesitation. When Parthian envoys offered a meeting under truce, Crassus agreed. Despite warnings of treachery, he appeared thin, disoriented, and unable to command. What happened next is disputed: a miscommunication, a struggle, or a trap. Crassus was seized and killed. His body was never recovered by Rome. Despite worsening health, Crassus retained control over key decisions, until his final one. There was no deathbed in the traditional sense. Crassus died not in Rome, not in command, and not with ceremony, but in the open desert, surrounded by enemies and stripped of his authority. After the disastrous retreat from Carrhae, his army fractured. Thousands of Roman soldiers were either killed, captured, or scattered. Crassus, isolated with a small contingent of officers, attempted to negotiate a safe withdrawal. Parthian general Surena sent envoys under a white flag, offering peace terms. Crassus, exhausted and cornered, agreed to meet. Accounts diverge on what followed. According to some, the meeting turned hostile almost immediately. Parthian troops forcibly pulled Crassus from his horse. His bodyguards resisted. A brief struggle ensued. In the confusion, Crassus was struck down, either by the Parthians or by one of his own men attempting to prevent his capture. He died in physical collapse, without ceremony, at the mercy of foreign soldiers. His body was mutilated. His head and right hand were severed and presented as trophies to King Orodes II. Later, during a royal celebration in Armenia, Crassus's head was used as a stage prop in a performance of the Bacchia Greek tragedy, centered on pride and destruction. It was not an official condemnation. It was mockery, layered in symbolism and designed to degrade Rome's image. One version of the story, recorded later by Roman sources, claims that molten gold was poured into Crassus's mouth. Post-mortem, the act, if it occurred, was symbolic, a final insult aimed at the man most associated with Roman greed. It reflected how his enemies perceived him not as a strategist or statesman, but as a figure driven by hunger for wealth. In death, there were no final speeches, no testament to values or legacy. Crassus left no written last words, no deathbed decrees. His death was practical, brutal, and immediate. His remains were never recovered by the Roman state. Marcus Licinius Crassus died in 53 BCE. Power was immediately contested. Crassus's death at Carrhae in 53 BCE did not just mark the loss of a Roman general, it triggered a destabilizing rupture in the Republic's power structure. The first triumvirate had been built on three pillars: Caesar's popularity, Pompey's military prestige, and Crassus's wealth and influence. With Crassus gone, the structure collapsed. There was no immediate successor. Crassus had not groomed a political replacement beyond his son Publius, who also perished in the campaign. His client networks lost cohesion, loans were called in, support fragmented, and allies sought protection from stronger political forces. Rome's eastern ambitions were abruptly halted. The defeat at Carrhae was one of the worst military disasters in Roman history, and Crassus's role in provoking the war was now publicly questioned. Pompey and Caesar, once held in check by Crassus's balancing presence, drifted toward confrontation. Without Crassus to mediate disputes or offer mutual incentives, their rivalry hardened into open competition. In 49 BCE, just 4 years after Carrhae, Caesar crossed the Rubicon, initiating civil war. Crassus's absence also left a vacuum in economic policy. His close ties to tax collectors and contractors in the provinces had made him a powerful intermediary. After his death, disputes over tax contracts flared. The Roman treasury faced irregular revenue flows from the east, and financial factions began to realign under other patrons. Public reaction to his death was muted. No state funeral was held. His remains were never returned. The Senate neither honored him nor formally condemned him. The silence reflected Rome's discomfort with his legacy. Crassus had been indispensable but unpopular, powerful but not admired. In Parthia, The victory was celebrated as a decisive blow against Roman aggression. The severed head of Crassus became both a trophy and a warning. Rome would not forget the loss, nor would it recover from the consequences quickly. The political system he helped maintain had relied on equilibrium. His death removed the center of that balance. The historical record of Crassus began to evolve immediately. Marcus Licinius Crassus has remained a figure of debate among historians. Ancient sources such as Plutarch and Cassius Dio offer contrasting portrayals. Some depict him as greedy and reckless, others as strategic but overreaching. His role in the First Triumvirate is acknowledged, but often minimized compared to Caesar and Pompey. In many accounts, Crassus is not remembered for what he built, but for how he failed. Modern scholars view his career through a structural lens. Some argue Crassus was essential to the late Republic's functioning not because of moral leadership, but because of his capacity to hold opposing factions together. His death, therefore, is seen less as a personal failure and more as a systemic rupture. Without Crassus's moderating influence, Caesar and Pompey had no reason to cooperate. Others focus on his economic methods. Crassus is cited as an early example of elite financial manipulation in a collapsing republic. His use of wealth as a tool of political power, his control over fire brigades, and his exploitation of property confiscation are analyzed as institutionalized forms of coercion. Historians examining the fall of the Roman Republic often place Crassus at the center of a broader economic breakdown, in which politics became inseparable from private capital. The story of molten gold, whether fact or fabrication, has endured as a symbol of excess punished by irony. Many scholars doubt its literal truth. No contemporary Roman account verifies it definitively, and it may reflect a long-standing narrative device used by ancient chroniclers to condemn greed. Still, the image persists in popular memory, underscoring how Crassus's legacy became fused with cautionary symbolism. In more recent political literature, Crassus has been compared to oligarchs, financiers, and power brokers whose influence is vast but largely invisible. His lack of public charisma, contrasted with his enormous behind-the-scenes leverage, fits modern profiles of unelected power in unstable systems. Ultimately, Crassus is remembered less for his vision than for his consequences. His career marked the moment when wealth became indistinguishable from rule and when power, once based on tradition and law, began to shift toward private control. Modern historians continue to debate the long-term effects of Crassus's rule. Marcus Licinius Crassus reshaped the Roman Republic not through ideology or military brilliance, but by proving that wealth alone could command influence, direct legislation, and override tradition. He introduced no new doctrine, but he accelerated a fundamental transformation, the consolidation of private capital into political authority. Crassus demonstrated that influence could be engineered. He used debt as leverage, property acquisition as power, and silence as currency. His alliances were built not on trust, but on transactions. In this, he set a precedent that outlasted his life. Later figures in Roman politics, and in other empires, would follow a similar pattern, acquiring control through non-military, non-democratic means. His defeat at Carrhae exposed the limits of this model. Wealth could raise an army, but it could not replace field experience, local intelligence, or cultural understanding. Crassus's reliance on institutional control failed when applied outside the boundaries of Rome. His death marked the first time a Roman general had been publicly humiliated by a foreign power since the early Republic. The loss undermined confidence in Roman invincibility and revealed that individual ambition could damage collective stability. Culturally, Crassus became a cautionary example, not a villain, but a warning. His story was absorbed into Roman moral discourse as an example of greed overreaching itself. The supposed molten gold, the beheaded general, the empty triumph, these became part of how Rome narrated its own decline. Legally, Crassus left no reforms. Institutionally, he left no school, but structurally, he helped create the conditions for collapse. The Republic's descent into civil war was hastened not just by Caesar's ambition or Pompey's pride, but by Crassus's absence. When one of the three pillars fell, the others collided. His legacy is not preserved in monuments or doctrine, but in systems, in how power is organized, how wealth redefines the rules, and how influence spreads quietly through debt, fear, and dependence. These are not Roman concerns alone. In the end, Marcus Licinius Crassus left behind no empire, no vision, and no successors. Only a warning that the pursuit of power without boundary creates a vacuum when it fails, and that what fills it is rarely better.